All right. Put them on the boob tube. You want to watch? Dance, sucker, dance. All right, you gotta go.
Russia and the U.S. may be at odds over Ukraine, but the two countries agreed on a prisoner exchange that has led to the release of a former U.S. Marine. The family of Trevor Reed tells ABC News that he is now on a flight back to the U.S. after being detained in Russia since 2019. ABC's Reno Roy with the very latest. Reno.
Well, David and Charlene, Trevor Reed spoke to his family a short time ago, describing that prisoner exchange like a spy swap you see in movies. He's now on a plane back home and potentially just hours away from hugging his parents for the first time in years. Former Marine Trevor Reed is now a free man, heading back to the U.S. after spending nearly 3 years in a Russian prison on what U.S. officials long described as bogus charges. The U.S. and Russia coming to a surprise deal in a time of heightened tension. Talks for this swap ongoing for months and intensified in recent weeks amid concerns over Reed's health. U.S. officials agreeing to hand over convicted Russian drug trafficker Konstantin Yeroshenko, who was serving a 20-year federal prison sentence in exchange for Reed. The 30-year-old was arrested in 2019. Russian authorities claiming he assaulted a police officer. Reed was later sentenced to 9 years in prison, the U.S. government calling his detainment unjust, his family maintaining his innocence, his parents speaking with CNN after his release.
He sounds kind of subdued. I think he's a little overwhelmed.
Yeah, he seems to be in shock a little bit. We're just glad that obviously he's on his way home, but they also have a doctor on the plane. So he's getting checked out, and that was our main concern.
Trevor telling his father the prisoner exchange happened on the tarmac in Turkey.
Trevor quickly told us that the American plane pulled up next to the Russian plane, and they walked both prisoners across at the same time like you see in the movies.
The Reed family thanking the Biden administration. The president called them as they were talking to Trevor to tell them he'd been freed. Biden saying he's celebrating Reed's return, adding, the negotiations that allowed us to bring Trevor home required difficult decisions that I do not take lightly. And Reed was one of several Americans detained by Russia. WNBA star Brittany Griner has been in prison since February for allegedly having hashish oil in her bag at the airport. And American tourist Paul Whelan has been in Russian custody since 2018 after being arrested on espionage charges. Well, as thunderstorms rumbled through Wednesday night across New Mexico into Texas, we are going to turn to a dry line that is going to bring fire concern both on Thursday across Arizona into New Mexico, as well as on Friday across New Mexico into portions of Texas. So this concern will be watched, as you're already seeing red flag warnings issued for this event, even some watches in place across Texas and Oklahoma for that potential of that fire risk on Friday. So continuing to see the ones not spark those fires is going to be key. Looking at wind gusts anywhere from 36 miles per hour into Las Vegas up to 25 miles per hour into Colorado Springs on Thursday, as we are still dealing with the heat as well to the south. 92 into Phoenix, Albuquerque about 82, even building into those upper 70s across Denver, where there is the chance for some of those storms to continue to blossom. But then we are going to see that a low pressure system will start to drag in some cooler temperatures for your Friday. Even watch Salt Lake City lose about 5 to 10 degrees, and we will see temperatures knock back a bit to the south as well.
This is AP News Minute. Russian state TV on Wednesday aired footage of Trevor Reed, an American Marine veteran jailed by Moscow, being brought to an airport ahead of his return to the United States. Russia and the U.S. have carried out a dramatic prisoner exchange, trading Reed for a convicted Russian drug trafficker. Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed to Russia's parliament on Wednesday that goals of the country's military operation in Ukraine will be, quote, unconditionally fulfilled. He also said Russia has averted the economic devastation intended by the sanctions imposed by the West. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said Wednesday that the 200-plus members of the House of Commons who have been sanctioned by Russia should view it as a, quote, badge of honor. Johnson was addressing reports that the Russian Foreign Ministry has announced sanctions on members of the UK Parliament as retaliation for sanctions on Russian politicians. And world leaders and a bevy of U.S. political and foreign policy elite paid their respects to the late Madeleine Albright, America's first female Secretary of State. Led by President Joe Biden, some 1,400 mourners gathered Wednesday to celebrate Albright's life and accomplishments at Washington National Cathedral. Ron Harris, Associated Press, with AP News Minute.
This is your daily news briefing from Cheddar News. Elon Musk's Twitter takeover is hurting Tesla. The EV leader dropped $126 billion off its value as investors worry that Musk would have to sell Tesla stock to fund his Twitter purchase, in addition to the $12.5 billion loan secured against his Tesla stake. Harvard University announcing Tuesday it is dedicating $100 million to study and atone for its ties to slavery. The school plans on identifying and supporting the descendants of enslaved people who labored at the university. This comes after a report the school once enslaved more than 70 people. Fort Worth, Texas, becoming the first city in the United States to mine Bitcoin. A small mining farm was built in City Hall and is made up of 3 Bitman Antminer S9 mining rigs. They will run 24/7. Miners will be posted, though, on a private network to minimize any security risks. And that's your Cheddar News update. I'm Alicia Nieves in New York.
Oh, I've travelled all over, telling folks they could save by bundling home and car insurance. But here's the real secret. Eye contact. We just had a moment. Go.
This is CNET, and here are the stories that matter right now. Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey has described Elon Musk's move to buy the company as the correct first step. The comments came after Twitter's board of directors unanimously approved Musk's $44 billion bid to buy the company on Monday. In a series of tweets, former Twitter CEO Dorsey said he didn't believe anyone should own or run Twitter, but that, quote, solving for the problem of it being a company, Elon is the singular solution I trust. In a statement after the deal was approved, Musk said Twitter had tremendous potential and he looked forward to working with the company and the community of users to unlock it. Facebook is struggling to keep track of all the data it collects, according to an apparently leaked document written by the company's privacy engineers. First reported by Vice, the document says Facebook's system of, quote, open borders means it can't guarantee how data is used, and that could mean the company falls afoul of regulators. In a statement to CNET, Facebook parent company Meta said the document doesn't describe the, quote, extensive processes and controls it has in place to meet regulations. And finally, in other privacy news, Google launched a new data safety section in its App Store on Tuesday. The new feature shows users whether app developers are collecting data, what it will be used for, and whether it's shared with third parties. It also shows whether data is encrypted on an app and whether users can ask for data to be deleted. Stay up to date with the latest by visiting CNET.
Turn now to a significant declaration from the White House official at the helm of this country's COVID response. Dr. Anthony Fauci says the pandemic phase of COVID in this country is over. He made those comments while speaking with PBS's Judy Woodruff yesterday evening. Dr. Fauci explained that COVID isn't going anywhere, but this country has come a long way from the case counts we were seeing back in January.
We are certainly right now in this country out of the pandemic phase. Namely, we don't have 900,000 new infections a day and tens and tens and tens of thousands of hospitalizations and thousands of deaths. We are at a low level right now. So if you're saying, are we out of the pandemic phase in this country? We are.
Dr. Fauci went on to say that some people may have to be vaccinated for COVID yearly in order to keep case counts low. Let's go live now to Washington, D.C., where Newsy White House correspondent Kellen Howell is standing by live. Kellen, a lot of people were taken aback by that comment because we're so used to being in a pandemic. What more can you tell us about Dr. Fauci's comments?
Well, it certainly is a major shift in tone from Dr. Fauci, Lisa. We've heard him being asked by reporters over and over again, what is the path out of this pandemic? How do we get back to normal? And Dr. Fauci has repeatedly said that this would happen in phases and that eventually we would shift from being in a pandemic phase into what he has called an endemic phase. And so in these comments in this PBS interview, it's sounding like he's suggesting that we may be now in that endemic phase of this COVID situation, where rather than it being in control of Americans' day-to-day lives, that it's something that we have control over and have the tools now to deal with and live a normal life. And Dr. Fauci, as you pointed out earlier, talked about the low level of cases right now, the low rates of transmission, and how hospitalizations are nowhere near what we had seen before. And so all of these things indicate that we have shifted into that next stage of the pandemic. But he went on to talk a little bit more about what that life might look like, this new normal of living in the endemic phase of
U.S.
COVID.
is out of pandemic phase.
So if you're saying, are we out of the pandemic phase in this country? We are. What we hope to do, I don't believe, and I've spoken about this widely,
expert,
we're not going to eradicate this virus. If we can keep that level very low and intermittently vaccinate people, and I don't know how often
U.S.
that will
out
have
of the
to
pandemic
be,
phase.
Dr. Fauci did go on to clarify that globally he thinks we still are in a pandemic because other countries are still facing much higher rates of transmission and hospitalizations than we are seeing here in the United States. But he did point to the fact that many Americans have already had an infection and so may have some form of immunity. And we've seen an increase in the number of people who have been vaccinated. So all of those things combined help to keep those transmission rates low. But I should point out for our viewers, Lisa, that Dr. Fauci did just say a few hours ago that he will not be attending the White House Correspondents' Dinner this weekend due to concerns about COVID-19 transmission at the dinner. At this time, President Biden is still expected to attend that event.
Let's talk about the CDC for a moment. The CDC just released a new study on the total number of infections that was pretty telling. Can you walk us through the findings and give us the major takeaways?
Yeah, well, the big headline here is that the CDC now estimates that a majority, about 60% of Americans have already been infected with COVID-19. I want to pull up some of these numbers for our viewers here, just so we get a bigger picture of what that looks like across this country. And the CDC is saying that a lot of this is due to that major spike in cases that we saw from the Omicron wave this winter. So 60% of Americans overall have antibodies, even more in young children. 75% of children ages 11 and younger, the CDC estimates, have antibodies. And cases of COVID-19, however, are still rising. They're up 23% from last week, so something to keep in mind there. But the CDC estimating that they, undercounting has been a serious issue throughout this pandemic. And at one point, CDC was estimating that for every one confirmed case of COVID-19, there were 3 that were unreported. So that's why we're kind of seeing these new updated numbers now. The CDC officials are also saying that despite these numbers, which do indicate that most Americans have some level of antibody protection, they're still recommending that Americans should get vaccinated and should get booster shots because those vaccines provide the broadest form of protection against serious illness, hospitalization, and death.
Is it in the back? It's in the front. All right, you want to get it for me? Stick it in the back. I'm gonna find you. I'm gonna get you one way or another. I'm gonna win you. I'm gonna get you one way or another. I'm gonna see you. I'm gonna meet you one day. Maybe next week. I'm gonna get you.
Steak obsessed? Ditto. Fresh Direct. The obsession is real.
Gulliver, Russia says it destroyed close to 60 military targets in Ukraine overnight. What more can you tell us?
In particular, the Russians are saying that they destroyed an important stockpile of weapons supplied to Ukraine by its Western allies in Zaporizhia, big city in the center east of the country. Obviously, we can't verify that. The last thing the Ukrainians would want to do would be to admit that this weaponry has been destroyed. The Ukrainians have also been claiming to have destroyed large quantities of Russian armor, and that's also impossible to verify. It's very possible that at least some of the strikes that Russia continues to make all over Ukraine are due to their attempts to destroy weaponry as it is on its way to the front lines in the east and south of the country, or wherever they think that they have information that it's being stored. It's absolutely crucial to Ukraine at the moment to try to keep the location of this weaponry as secret as possible to prevent it from being destroyed. These strikes on what may be what Russia deems to be military targets are accompanied by continual strikes on what Russia deems to be critical infrastructure targets, and particularly railways, which are, of course, also used for transporting weaponry as well as Ukrainian export goods. And this morning, they seem to have successfully destroyed a bridge in Odessa region in the extreme southwest of the country that there was already a strike on yesterday that didn't completely destroy it. So that's clearly part of Russia's strategy, is to destroy the infrastructure that Ukraine may be using to transport this weaponry, as well as the weaponry itself.
Gulliver, Russia's strategy in this conflict has shifted towards the east. Is that going according to plan, or is Russia facing resistance from Ukrainian forces?
Russia is definitely facing very stiff resistance from Ukrainian forces and hasn't managed to take control of towns very close to Donetsk, which is the stronghold of the Russian-backed forces and has been since 2014. Avdiivka and Mariinka, just north of there, really suburbs of Donetsk in a way, are still in Ukrainian hands. The Ukrainian defensives there have proved to be very, very strong. But in the north of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, it's not quite the same story. Today, the Ukrainian military admitted to having lost control of a handful of villages in those areas, which are not significant gains in themselves, but which show that the Russian military is slowly making progress towards what many analysts believed to be its goal of surrounding Ukrainian forces and possibly surrounding the Ukrainian-held cities of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk in Donetsk region.
Gulliver, thank you very much for that. Gulliver Craig reporting there from Kiev.
From the ABC 10 News Studios, this is Community Connection.
Ensuring every mom, baby, and family gets an equal, healthy start to life is at the heart of a Mother of a Movement. Joining me today is Heidi Lang with the March of Dimes to talk about this year's March for Babies. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you for having me.
So, back to in-person this year. So exciting. When is it and what can people expect?
We are so excited to be back in person at Balboa Park, May 21st. Registration starts at 7 a.m. and our walk kicks off at 8 a.m. We will have a superhero sprint for the kiddos, games and activities for the kids, a parenthood tent, and Rubio's is generously donating one free taco card for all our registered walkers. So we hope you and your family and friends will all come out to join us on May 21st.
It is such a great day for families. So let's talk about the March of Dimes ambassador families. Why are they so important?
We have two very special ambassador families. Liz, who is a nurse at Tri